I have so many questions. Just to take a step back, the utility you're building, can you give me examples of what things you're building on top of Pi network and the examples plus the impact? Like, you've obviously prioritized some things that are gating the launch of the permissionless network. And so I'm kind of curious, like, what are the things and what is the impact? Once you have these things, why do you need them to wait to be permissionless?
Yeah, so utility is decentralized efforts from the whole community, not just the core team. Of course, we play a big role inside that by providing the infrastructure that facilitating the decentralized efforts, such as providing the platform, the SDK, and developer tools. However, the actual building and the honing on the real true utility for human to solve human needs is a completely a collective effort from the community builders and also community users of those apps. We have ourselves built some apps. For example, just now I already mentioned the KYC app. The KYC app, because also following accessibility, we didn't outsource to a third party, which usually charge at least $1 for doing a check, right? So that actually we develop a native solution that not only solve the scalability and also wide distribution of the geographic locations, but also it doesn't require people to pay out-of-pocket cost. Pioneers actually pay Pi cryptocurrency for the labor or the work done by the, crowdsourced human validators within the community to perfecting the validation process where the AI or machine automation lacks. AI advanced a lot, of course, but, for identity verification, there are cases that still needs human touch. And that human touch was provided by the community itself. So actually pioneers are working as validators, are actually making Pi from the pioneers who want to verify their identity. So this is a true utility using Pi, meaning that the Pi is used to facilitate transaction between the labor of the validator, work of the validator, and result in actual substance, which is whether someone is verified or not.
So you guys built a custom KYC solution?
Yes, we did. We have to because, even the market providers don't necessarily provide KYC in, for example, regions that are really small or have a smaller market because most of the KYC providers are, profit driven. Building the infrastructure for a specific small region really cost a lot for those businesses. But for Pi, in order to really achieve inclusivity, we have to provide KYC solution to all regions where our pioneers exist. So we designed innovatively this design that scalably to cover all geolocations while at the same time not costing out of pocket.
So this is super interesting to me because, and just for people listening, KYC stands for Know Your Customer, and it's a really common thing you have to do in this space. Like anytime, just for like a lot of regulatory reasons, it's the best practice to KYC folks for things like grants programs and kind of anytime you're dealing with tokens, you're probably KYCing somebody, especially if it's a permission chain like this is right now. So I see why you're having to do it, but building a totally custom one, that's a huge effort. I've actually built integrated with providers multiple times to automate KYC for things like grant programs. They're checking OFAC databases. They're checking a whole bunch of different things to make sure that, it depends on the level of KYC you're trying to do, but, making sure you're not on a list of countries where you're just not allowed to do business, like North Korea and stuff. What is the process under the hood again? And what is running there in the app and how do people verify identity, especially this manual process, it sounds like with pioneers who are doing the work. How does it work? What are they looking into? What's automated, what's not? Just very curious to hear more about that.
Well, it starts as a typical KYC solution, what you would expect. So you pull your phone, you have to show liveness, turn your head, respond to certain prompts. You have to show your ID and the ID is captured and then AI is reading it. You have to fill out certain information, which is pretty standard stuff that all the KYC solutions do. We have a back end layer, which is processing all those things automatically as much as it can. And as expected, there are some cases where and certain questions that the AI has or is uncertain about, and those questions need to be answered. Every KYC solution has to answer them with humans. So what we do at Pi is that we reward existing selected trustworthy already KYC'd members of the Pi network to answer those questions. We also had to add an additional layer of security on this so that what they see is not the raw data of what someone updated. So for example, if someone were to want to verify the face of someone on an ID versus whatever we got from a selfie picture that they get, then our software is cutting out only the picture from the ID, is cutting out the picture from the selfie, putting the two together and asking a validator to say, are these two pictures the same person? Another use case, and there's multiple of them, it will be the last example I give, is that if you need to ask certain question about an ID to a human, the software is covering with black reduction boxes all the information on the ID, all the text that is not supposed to be seen. And it's also cutting out the picture. So when you're showing an ID, it's pretty much fully anonymized, the picture is missing, the data is covered. It says California driving license. That is not covered. And then possibly the question is does this look like a real California driving license, for example? And then the specific question that a human needed to answer can be answered while trying to preserve privacy and security. Then after this whole process completes, we have to do all the compliance requirements, like you mentioned, OFAC and other things.
Yeah, like it's packed into this one app that basically follow the guidelines of the law and regulations. This is not just a work that we do just for Pi network. The whole community actually have this, produce this large scale KYC to social network is actually a contribution from Pi network from all of us, including pioneers, to the world. Because, as the industry towards, getting more and more into the compliance, having a large enough social network that is KYC make the world ready to plug in true Web3 tools or services more easily. It also facilitates more easier onboarding of future other chains or other blockchain or financial services or Web3 type of applications that has a financial aspect or element inside. This is something that why we need to actually build an in-house kind of a solution, because it's important for our philosophy of accessibility, but also it actually create a great contribution. I mean, there was in Web 2, Facebook's innovation was using real identity, real name in the social network. And that breakthrough the last few decades, the fame and the boom of Facebook. The next phase for Web3 means ownership, right? People are being able to own. When it touches ownership, there is the need of KYC. That's why we're building this huge network, not just large, but actually more compliant and towards the future that easy to plug in for even other services.
That makes a ton of sense to me. And I agree with you. Like if you guys succeed in getting a high quality KYC done that other people trust, other networks, other people who might want to use interact with that network of people, then you've created something pretty valuable for sure. What other kinds of applications are going to run or are already running on Pi network? Some chains are purpose built or better for other things than, they have unique things that they might be good at, whereas they might not be good at other things. Is it a general purpose L1, or do you think there are some applications that are more appealing to be built on top of the network than say something, other applications that might be a better fit somewhere else?
Any type of blockchain application that from other networks can also run on Pi. There's no restrictions there. We focus also on applications that traditionally have not been popular on blockchains. And I'm talking about applications that are very popular even in Web 2, the way that the world has been working until now. We had a couple of hackathons, and we have some programs inside Pi for people to collaborate and create apps. And we've had a few thousand developers engaged, producing hundreds of apps, and tens of thousands of pioneers giving them feedback on these ideas. So through these, they have started building applications of various kinds. Like, for example, one vertical is remote labor. One example is the KYC app that we build, but another example is apps that are similar to Fiverr or Upwork, where a pioneer can provide some work and in exchange get paid in Pi from someone else. And that work could be from something simple as creating a piece of art to something more complex than this. Another vertical of applications that we see, we actually have several marketplaces on Pi. And these marketplaces, each one has slightly different angle. Some marketplaces are focusing on user-to-user good exchanges like eBay. Others are focusing on rallying up and connecting merchants around the world. And some are even creating a decentralized network of logistics. So because Pi is in enclosed mainnet period right now, and you can't use Pi to use external FedEx or something like this, people have created this network of individuals who can help with delivery of goods. Other vertical is crowdsourcing tools. So, for example, there is an app for creating polls, and someone who wants to get some feedback from community and they don't have a community, they can post a poll there and reward people in Pi for answering those questions that they may have. There is other apps such as quote production, funny quotes, good quotes, quality quotes. And there's, of course, games that are using Pi. For example, when you lose, you spend some Pi to continue, or we use Pi to buy virtual goods, cats and fertilizer or whatever the game has with Pi.
Yeah, so basically, overall, the application, in addition to the traditional, like a blockchain-based kind of application like DeFi related, which Pi is capable of providing, especially after the open mainnet, we are also emphasizing utility or apps that facilitate access to true goods and services type of apps. And in addition to that, utility includes also entertainment or, social life. Like specifically on the social side applications, there are a bunch also coming from the community developers. But at the same time, we also are innovators of social applications. And we believe that the true Web3 social apps are not just moving from the Web2 and putting things on chain and then become Web3. Of course, that's one aspect, like the ownership aspect, like store things on chain, right? But we see far beyond that in the sense that we really want to build Web3 applications that actually make improvement of the flaws of Web2. For example, authenticity, the fake news, misinformation, disinformation. For example, information silo, information overload. How do you find high signal information from a crowd of noises? Like these type of things, we think with the tool of cryptocurrency and token economics, designing the token economics of using cryptocurrency are able to facilitate the incentive and disincentive inside the social applications to regulate or moderate the behavior online and ultimately achieving better content, better curated content, and better signal content. At the same time, make people more accountable in their behavior. And actually, this is not something that we just the only idea. This idea has been with Pi since the last 3 or 4 years. But actually, recently, because our ecosystem reached the point that we are actually about to launch some of our applications that is an instantiation of such ideas I just described. So we're actually excited very soon. Some of these apps of ours will actually be released.
And I want to mention that one of the reasons why we can actually do that at Pi is because of the large number of people on the network. So if certain social networking apps or certain apps that we are describing just now, they only start making sense when you have a large number of people. And the utility is much lower when you haven't reached the critical mass.
Yeah, I was going to point that same thing out. I mean, you can't have a Fiverr clone on chain without like a couple million people, because then you just don't have diversity enough to get the tasks. It's the chicken and the egg problem. So these marketplace type applications make a ton of sense. One thing you brought up, it was like very quick thing you said, but the thing about information silos, like data silos, this is one of the things that from back in 2017, when they were talking about token curated registries all the time, I was really interested in. There's lots of different data silos. I was just talking to a friend actually yesterday about how he works for a nonprofit that their whole job is to get researchers to open up their databases for collaborative, like open data, open science. And their issue is it's a social problem. They want to get credit and be the first to produce the final work of the research with that data. And so like researchers are just not incentivized to open up their databases. And I agree, like it'd be so cool to find like a token economic approach to solve that problem, because like I'm an open source zealot, by the way, if you didn't know that about me. Like, I love open source technology. It's like the only thing I'll ever build is open source software because I care about the impact that it can have. And I think that you can have the maximum impact with software if it's open source. And especially if you weave in like decentralized technologies and token economics, all of a sudden there's like an economic reason to do it too. That's maybe in theory more sustainable than the way things were before. And I think the other thing I wanted to say too is I liked the way that you framed the transition from Web 2 is just like taking an existing thing and making it better, not just completely getting rid of it. And I think that's an important point to make. We're getting towards the top of the show here. And I always ask this last question, what have I not asked you guys that you wanted to talk about? What's the thing I should have asked that I didn't ask yet?
Good question.
You want to talk about PyOS?
Sure, we can talk about PyOS.
So since you mentioned open source, we recently launched our own open source license agreement. It's called PyOS. This allows developers to get help from other developers and collaborate when they're producing Pi applications. We saw a lot of adoption, and we saw that it was even helpful in hackathons. So we recently had a hackathon, and that resulted in several PyOS applications that were built. And the good thing about it is that in the end of the hackathon, before we start the next one, there is a code base that even if half of those applications end up the developers not continuing, who knows? But the next set of developers can potentially start from that code and make some use of it.
I've seen a few people in our space create their own licenses. I typically go with the AGPL v3 license, just mainly because my business partner helped write it back in the day. And I like that it ensures that the things that I work on, I'm not an engineer myself, but as an entrepreneur, I'm helping get these things built, that they'll always be free and open source. Like I like that license. I lean like very copy left. What is in your license? Like, how is it written? Like, what are the benefits of the license? I'd love to read it too. If you can send me the license, I would love to read it. But just like the high level for people, like what does your license mean and what are the implications of using it?
It started by prototyping after the MIT license and has some components inside that are emphasizing collaboration within the Pi network. And
yeah, so it facilitates, building inside the network with each other, while at the same time protects the network itself as well. So it's a Pi network specific, OS license. That's why it's PyOS, and they facilitate within the network contributions to create applications one on top of
what
another.
Protections is it providing to the network? What are you guys protecting the network from?
Basically, for example, preventing of just a complete copy of this network's applications to completely just migrate to another network, for example. It's exclusively within the network.
This enabled a bunch of developers who otherwise wouldn't be sharing their code to feel more comfortable to actually share the code. We find conversations when we're giving grants or when we're discussing with teams of whether they are willing to license their code under PyOS, we find them much easier to result into actually people making the code.
It's interesting. I mean, I've had this conversation with so many entrepreneurs and developers, who have a lot of fear and anxiety around open source. Like just something as simple as like, how do I do it? Like I want to open source and I don't know what license, but assume I know what license I'm going to use. How do I do it? And I'm always like, you just put it in your repo. Like you just make it open source. It's really easy. There is a lot of philosophical conversation around the different licenses and like the protections they provide, and totally get where the people in your ecosystem who are building these applications are coming from and where you're coming from. My philosophy has always been, and I might be wrong, I've kind of got this experiment going at this company I'm building called Olaplex, and I'll tell you guys more about that later. It's not for the show, but it's 100% like full stack GPL licensed. And my thesis is that by being that way, anybody can fork it and do whatever they want with it, but all the things that they do to improve it will come back. And like if we can take advantage of those at my company, then we will, if that's something that we can use. And that really the only way we win as a business is by being open and collaborating with as many people as possible. And then and so for something like Pi, I mean, you guys have built a massive network. It's almost impossible to replicate that part the network, the software that runs Pi could be 100% open source, and no one could, I mean, I could copy it. I could figure out how to copy it, but like no one's going to use it. It's like crickets and tumbleweed when I launch it. I could go on about this topic like all day. It's not worth getting like too into the weeds.
I can see you're very interested in this.
You mentioned like there's some really exciting applications that are launching, and I didn't want to leave that one hanging. Like, do you want to say